Chapter 22. Gain of function complete. The words flashed up on screen with the automated voice as Alessandro straightened uncomfortably in the silence that followed. Miracles did happen. His jaw firmed as he lay a comforting hand on Annika's shoulder, where she stood in their makeshift base, overlooking the stem pod that barely sustained Velda. They'd managed to pull her from the rubble. It was a miracle they'd found her in the first place. Annika couldn't explain it. She just knew where to look. Alessandro knew Velda was unlikely to recover, even with the stem pod and all the power that old lump of junk sucked up from their generator. He suspected Annika knew as much, not that she'd allow anyone to switch it off anytime soon. By the time they'd found Velda, she'd lost a lot of blood. He hadn't expected to find a pulse. His hand fell as he now strode to the door. Annika had been there for hours, not speaking, not eating or responding to anything or anyone, entirely focused on that rickety stem pod where her sister lay. She had to know the worst was coming. Alessandro very much doubted Velda would last the night, but glancing back, he had to admit it wouldn't be the first time Annika had pulled off a miracle. Back at his miserable excuse of a desk, Alessandro slipped on a pair of meta-glasses, but past memories projected over its immersion, far more vivid than its infographics. Horrific images. His mind often took him back there. His hands shook. Everything had fallen apart so quickly. It was hard to believe it was real and not some nightmare or VR ad hacking his thoughts as they so often tried. Across the world, governments had been overthrown in a matter of weeks. Political leaders torn limb from limb by ordinary civilians. Alice paled where he sat, reliving it. It was his fault. What those leaders had done was unforgivable. Yes, had to be dealt with, yes, but looking back, other options now presented themselves. Ones he'd been too angry, too fearful to consider. As things stood, he had burnt numerous files to the blockchain, files which would have otherwise remained buried, along with the many before him who tried to expose the truth. He believed people needed to know that in seeing this evil, they'd get rid of it. So he released it. Everything on the first drive, the full, uncensored, horrific truth, made it immortal, immutable, and uncensorable on the decentralized web. What unraveled next chilled him to the bone. He never realized the depths to which rage would drag down the good and the sane. Nothing could have prepared him for how things had played out. He had thought it was only his life he was risking, and that of those who had committed these heinous crimes against humanity. In hindsight, he realized that had been naive. Those in power were torn from it, torn apart, from their homes, flood out of bunkers. Their screams still rang in his ears. Machines, drones, and weapons could not protect them. They were no match for the force they unwittingly created as their victims' loved ones, entire populations, turned on them. But it did not stop there. Rage gripped populations, unleashing a beast with inhuman strength and an insatiable appetite for revenge. Despite most civilians being heavily drugged, overfed, undernourished, riddled with health complications and socially divided, nothing could prevent them from coming together to form a beast far bigger, far more ferocious than the one who consumed their loved ones. Within a few months, no one from the old order was left. Individuals took it upon themselves to decide what was right and wrong. Groups of rioters were found deciding on a whim who should live and who should die, who was an oppressor and who was the oppressed. The wealthy were targeted next in their luxury homes, viewed as those who benefit from or were connected to corrupt leaders, murdered, their wealth treasured by those who deemed its very ownership proof of corruption. This madness trickled all the way down to anyone able to afford or rent property. Innocent families and their households massacred and abused. If a person was not deemed a victim, they were labeled an oppressor. Ownership, race, faith, youth, sexuality, physical fitness, all became ever-changing markers to identify oppressors. Men, women, children, even their pets, murdered and abused as rage drowned out common sense, reality, and humanity. Asterisk. Grace had learned of the troubles in school, but seeing it play out in Mobius firsthand, feeling the reach of evil in Alay's account, was chilling. She shrank out of the depths of sleep and horror, the weight of all she'd seen threatening to drag her back, drown her, but 87 hauled her out to a light doze. "Ignorant pests," he ground, irritation carved to his brow as he studied all she'd seen since she slipped out of reach. harmful to other humans and human concerns. Not all of us, it felt like a personal attack. No, there's choice in that. How on earth she had sunk out of reach, and whether she'd done it intentionally, he couldn't be sure. But he was relieved to have a hold on her again. He couldn't have her running rampant through Mobius, could see just how frighteningly close she'd got to certain information. He'd have to keep her out until... How do they not see it? What they've become? They're monsters. She felt 87's sober nod. He knew all too well. They were asleep for the change and woke in a world of filters, without mirrors. Like an autoimmune disease, they target others, destroy them, destroy these people that reflect with accuracy. These vital human transistors, shutting off taps which allow for the flow of life and energy through Mobius to circulate, sustaining this world which they have become so attached to, where time is fundamental and entropy king. Grace looked shaken. It's not entropy. It's evil, satanic, whatever you want to call it. They're possessed by it. You people have a flair for drama, 87 drawled with mock amusement. It's an opposing force, no more. Here in the testnet, it's necessary. Free will and all that. Satan literally means the opposer. Doesn't matter what it means. Look at what it does, it's power. Terror laced each word. She could feel herself shaking as 87's metaphysical mind wrapped around. In Mobius, touch wasn't external. It was saturating, a complete overlay of being, warmth, and comfort. It's not frightening if you understand power, Grace. Consider, if the consequence of human beings creating their own rules places us all outside of fundamental order, then entropy is inevitable. Now consider this great opposer's power. It can only expedite that which would have happened anyway. It has all the finite power of a destructive child. After all, anyone can destroy something quicker than it would naturally deteriorate in a place where time is fundamental. Real power is that which can reverse entropy, bring about something new, something beautiful, powerful, something that could never have existed here had it not. The sort which can create life and allow fragile beauty to thrive in the inhospitable. Now that is power, and that is in us all. Like love? Grace felt 87 scoff. What? I'm right, aren't I? Doesn't matter, he laughed. You can't identify or make use of it. You can't even describe it. Of course I can. It's affection, romance, stability from someone who cares. Wrong, 87 interrupted rudely, enjoying the high perch he'd resumed in her mind, peering through the net curtains that wrapped round them from where she lay. They are byproducts. Love pulls back the veil of ignorance, seeks betterment for all, and allows one to step into the unknown, honoring the fundamental, enjoying it forever. Innate, Grace felt herself relax, and once again, she drifted back from the shores to deeper sleep. Wait, no, 87 cursed, diving in after her in an attempt to drag her back. But for all his searching, he couldn't find her. She was gone again. Fishing himself back out, he sat a while, hoping for her to surface again, but she didn't. Asterisk. Alessandro rubbed his brow. He had tried to confront evil, cut off its head by exposing and targeting those responsible, but even after their murder, it only grew, spread like wildfire. The power of those fallen leaders transferred to enraged citizens like a virus, a transcendent force of death and suffering. Unable to watch, he hid away, not knowing what to do, paralyzed by guilt and grief, not eating, not sleeping. He wanted to die. Once the people had exhausted the injustice of the wealthy, he had hoped that would bring an end to it, but it didn't stop. Over time, as resource dwindled, anyone who had anything became an oppressor, a fair target. Madness broke out, spread like a disease. People tore each other apart. It was every man for himself, absolute hell on earth. Innocent blood was on his hands. He continued to hide in his darkened room for months. Everything inside him cried out in desperation to something greater, to reset the balance, calm the storm. He had been trying to help. Although not a religious man, Grace saw some kind of hardwiring deep inside him begin to beg and bargain with fundamentals for intercession on his behalf. That night he drifted to the quiet reprieve of sleep and woke the next day to find the face of an angel over him. Annika's emerald eyes sparkling down where he lay inside that very same stem pod which Velda now used. "You're quite the dreamer," she chirped, gesturing to the monitor. Chapter 23. Alessandro couldn't quite believe his eyes, scanning the angelic face that hovered overhead in the light. He wasn't in pain, wasn't hungry. His god-awful smell had gone. "Am I dead?" "You've been out for some time," Annika drawled. "How long?" He managed, barely audible, still very much in his head. "Few weeks? 10 at most?" Alessandro blinked back in disbelief. 10 weeks. How? He tried to sit, which yanked at the cannulas in his arm and neck that stemmed from the beaten-up pod he lay in. Growling, he looked back at her. She was tiny. How on earth had she moved him? "My drones do all the heavy lifting, though you filled out a bit since then." He stared down at his legs. They were his, but they didn't look it. He couldn't remember feeling so good. No aches, no pains, fully hydrated. He'd actually put on some muscle. "Thought you'd like that." She beamed as his mouth fell open. "They call it beauty sleep for a reason. I spend my life there, not in the pod, mind you." She gave a whimsical smile, watching him wave his arms about as he marveled at the strength of them. "In daydreams." Grace felt her heart leap on common ground from where she floated, watching the two of them. But as reality hit home, Alessandro paled, unwanted memories flooding back in, chilling and vivid, like waking from a bad dream. "It's not your fault," Annika was quick to add. Having seen his base and spent the past few weeks going over his notes, she could sense where his thoughts returned to. He was practically a skeleton when she found him, unconscious, soiled, lying in his own mess. "Truth stinks, but it is what it is," she shrugged. "Most can't handle it. Hell, few can handle themselves. Could use your help, actually, in turning things round." But heavy brows fell over his dark complexion. She had to be 21 at most. "Kid, I'm not magic, and see these?" His hands waved wildly once again. "Not wands." "I did begin to wonder," she smiled. "Far as magic goes, it's amazing what a few words can do." "That's supposed to be funny," he snapped. Far as he was concerned, words had opened the gates to hell. "It's a joke," Annika chuckled, eyeing his miserable expression. "My life is." "Well, based on that expression, it could use some work." She chucked a VR headset his way. "No time like the present," but he sat unmoved. "Look, humor is like faith. Reminds us we can make something good out of nothing and have fun doing it." She gave a shrug. "Besides, what else is there? We use the tools we got. Don't have any outside the metaverse." "Now that's disappointing." Her gaze rolled over him, pleased with the spark that lit. "Know how to get a rise out of a guy, don't you?" "You say that like it's hard," she laughed, throwing on her own headset. Grace watched as Alessandro shut down old memories in Mobius. Removing his headset, the cold stone walls of the cave stared back. The sound of others working to update their surveillance system echoed now as though a haunting memory. Though Annika's world stood still, there was lots to be done, and lots more depending on them, all seemingly sucked into the tornado of which they were a part. Since they'd met, their team had grown considerably and now formed much of the resistance, the only force left aside from mercenaries and crime syndicates. Global civil war had left a dangerous power vacuum, and those who survived now attempted to carve up the little that was left. He watched their team updating the surveillance system outside. Tom was doing all right, but the kid, Marco, needed a lot more pointers. Staring back at projected data, he tried to concentrate, could still hear Annika's warm laugh from all those years back when she'd strolled off. To this day, he still felt responsible. But Annika, her perspective, her humor, they helped, had brought a part of him back to life. Who knows, maybe she could do the same for Velda. Asterisk. When Velda did wake in the dilapidated stem pod, a cubicle curtain had been pulled round and Annika's bright eyes fixed on her through the cloudy glass. "You're awake. I knew you'd make it." She pressed a button, and the pod gave a loud hiss before opening. "They didn't think so, the others I mean, but I knew," she beamed. "I just knew. And now—" Velda's hand shot up in a bid for silence, which didn't work until she heaved over the side of the pod. "Still feeling a bit rough, huh?" Velda closed her eyes, willing Annika to just stop talking. It was painful, physically painful, to go from the serenity of sleep to intense conversation at Anika's pace and level of energy. So listen, I thought we could... I need to get back to Wadsdan Manor, Velda interrupted. There's nothing left. They'll have relocated. But Annika shook her head. Alice was pretty thorough, scoured the usual frequencies, monitored their networks, even did a trip down there myself, but Annika's expression fell. There's nothing. Course you won't find them. We're special branch. But Annika's eyes shone with sympathy. We know how to hide, Velda insisted. Well, you did a good job under all that rubble. Annika's half-hearted smile clashed with her twin. I'll find them. But as the words fell out of Velda's mouth, a chilling notion crept in. What if this was it? The end of structure, of empire, the end of law and order, the vacuum of anarchy that'd be waiting to engulf her outside those doors, if that were the case. Annika squeezed her hand sympathetically, but Velda snatched it back. This is ridiculous. Get me a doctor. Ralph? He's hardly a doctor. Haven't seen one of them about since the blitz you got caught up in. Came out of nowhere. Took out most of the remaining infrastructure. Rumor has it the Volkov were trying to flush out the SMC and remaining government strongholds. Level the playing field, so to speak. Heard those who survived joined. Who? The SMC, Annika uttered under Velda's narrowing gaze. The SMC want to flush out the Volkov just as bad. They have good numbers, still have a shot. How long have I been here? Velda snapped. Close to a month. With that, Velda pulled out the cannula in her arm, a renewed sense of urgency having flooded in. Slow down. Takes time to... Annika stood, catching Velda as she fell. To get back on your feet. She tucked Velda back into the pod. You'll feel amazing, but it'll take your vestibular system a few days to adjust and get used to moving about. Annika visited her twin daily, bringing meals and updates. But on the third day, she woke to find Velda gone, without a trace. Asterisk. Anyone could have taken her, found us, Annika insisted, but he shook his head. She wouldn't just leave, without a word. Though her own began to fade as Alessandro pulled up footage of the pod from that morning. Velda could be seen leaving, alone. There was also a radio transmission a few hours ago, he offered apologetically. She's trying to rally the troops, Special Branch. That could be anyone. It's her signature, Alpha Bravo Veda. He watched as undeniable pain glossed her expression. Least she's okay, he offered, but he could see it was of little comfort as Annika strode out to climb the hill, one of the few green areas that remained overlooking London, England. What was left of it anyway. Chapter 24. Following Velda, Grace watched her establish a small base in the city, under the old museum. Its rickety generator needed some work, but she had it up and running soon enough. She listened out daily to the same radio frequency for Special Branch. Nothing. If anyone survived, they disappeared into the woodwork, as Annika said. Many seemed to have joined the SMC, who pushed back the crime syndicates. Bunch of mindless thugs. She couldn't believe they had abandoned her in Special Branch along with all hope and responsibility. She was the only one still prepared to fight for everything they believed in. Asterisk. Less than 90 miles from where Velda lay her head, Grace could see castle walls shrouded in fog. Guards could be seen patrolling lofty stone wall extensions, which surrounded the keys to their beloved England, Dover. The Volkov had secured it some months back. Their emblem and body armor now caught the eye of the moon, its silver glow exchanging glances with Kevlar and sharp steel. Grace could see these new 50-feet concrete walls had been extended to encase both the castle and harbor, transforming it into a modern military base, courtesy of Orsini construction, while their iron dome kept drones and airborne intruders at bay. Inside, Dimitri's narrow gaze pinched on the logo spread across the wall, Orsini. No one was to come or go without Volkov approval, Petrov's approval. It never ceased to amaze Grace, the detail to which you could see things in Mobius. She could feel Dimitri's anger burn with such intensity toward his younger brother, known for shrewd decisions and his Midas touch. He felt Petrov stole the position of consigliere out from under him. Grace could feel his nails bite into her palms. Well, in here, right now, he was king. Dimitri looked down at his wife, who lay unconscious among a scattering of broken glass as he fastened his trousers. Straightening out his collar in the mirror, He combed thinning black hair into place and adjusted his cufflinks while music and laughter wafted up the stairs from the hall. This evening's entertainment lay waiting. Asterisk. Through an adjacent curtain in Mobius, Grace could see a busy HQ in Denmark, where Geek tapped away below a dozen immersive screens that fed back the SMC's largest special op to date. Multiple teams were now strategically positioned across Europe. Tonight was the night. Hobbs, their project lead, hovered uncomfortably close, hanging over Geek's shoulder, anxiety palpable. While in the corner, Arden, otherwise known as Pockets, propped himself up at a table which he'd covered in refreshments for himself. Geek flicked to Dover, zooming in on the 3 power boats about to depart from just outside Calais. As they set off, they formed an arrowhead, slicing through black water while reinforcements hung back in the Netherlands. They were on their own. Angular cast body armor coating the men inside these boats, who appeared more machine than man as they sped towards Dover, their key to England. On the boat, Grace watched Malau settling into the journey, pushing back his visor, strands of black hair flicking about his face where he eyed Bossman up at the bow. "Flying yet, Rose?" Dusty satire lofted through comms, spilling through the dark figure's earpiece. Reuter stood head and shoulders above the rest, dwarfed only by Millie. Malau grinned at the adjacent boat, whose entire team acted as counterweight to his muscle. Reuter's gaze cut back to Malau, a wry smile just visible as he released the clip on his visor. Grace felt struck by his appearance. It was almost angelic. His dark complexion made him almost invisible against the night sky, but for eyes that shone with a strength and insight she'd rarely seen. "Titanic's headless horseman," Malau drawled, humor failing to ease Reuter's concern. "Doubts, boss man?" "Dover's heavily guarded. They have the dome. No one's ever cracked this tech." Malau gave a thoughtful nod as he watched Reuter carefully. "Some would call this madness. Just more stuff." Reuter relented with a shrug and the heavy pause that followed. He hadn't planned on being here, continuing to serve under a man like Hobbs, but then no one had planned on civil war or the troubles that followed. There was little option now but to help if he wanted a half-decent place for his kid to grow up. A smile grew at the thought. His little Alex. Hobbs was an asshole, but at least he was a predictable one to work under. If we're going for Europe, we need it. Transport links, supplies, the works. Malau gave a thoughtful nod before leaning back and closing his eyes as high winds sped them closer towards Dover. Mind clear, wind on his face. Reuter was a rare breed, smart, with good instincts, tough as nails but fair, loyal but not naive. So why on earth he passed up Hobbs's position all those years back, he'd never know. He did sometimes wonder if Reuter regretted it, allowing Hobbs, a man like that, to take control. "I've done some dirty shit for disgusting folk," Reuter once confided, "but there are some positions I'll never assume." He never did elaborate further, though it seemed he was privy to something they weren't aware of. Speaking of which, Malau peered out the corner of his eye as it brushed the curtain of space-time and the shadows of light that danced behind it. He threw Grace a wink. He'd always seen them, these ghosts, ever since he was a kid. Most were helpful, a few mischievous. Thankfully, he'd only brushed past those who emit evil once or twice, caught glimmers of them behind the eyes, or carried in the voices of those they used. Not that he ever spoke of it. Experience taught him at a young age the price of that. Right there next to Reuter floated a red-headed girl, a beautiful peace around her. "I've a good feeling about tonight." Malau smiled, resting his head back. They were getting close. As they approached the cliffs, 2 miles out, Reuter gave the order to cut engines, and they rode the rest of the way with oars on tide. Visors down, sound locks active. Reuter gave the lads a quick recap. "Comms through this frequency only. We got 3 teams, 3 off-grid keys, lookout, keep, and gatehouse. We need to activate all 3 to allow changes to the Iron Dome." Reuter streamed the demo they'd been shown at base, the recap playing out on their headsets. "We do that. We let in air support and Dover's ours. She's the key to England. I want maximum defector adoption. We're here to win a war, lads, not prolong the fight. Tranquilizers are your primaries. Understood?" Witty memes flashed across his visor in response. "I see high walls, top of high fucking cliffs." AMJ groaned as they washed close, holding up the sleeve of his body armor, grapple hook loaded. This ain't gonna get me there. Les Flacco wants to share. Flacco grinned, flicking the stub of his joint over the side where it fizzed into black water. We shouldn't be using jetpacks so soon, or exhausting ourselves with a climb carrying all this junk, AMJ grumbled, kicking his haversack. He's old, worried he can't get himself up no more. Maestro grinned at AMJ, who was now all starch. I'm for efficiency is all. That's what he tells the wife, Quatra chuckled, drawing a rare grin from the grumpy old mercenary. Still think we overpacked. I've taken out an entire platoon with nothing but my bare hands and a shoelace. Maestro and a few others finished his usual skit with a grin, much to AMJ's annoyance. And no one's broke through Orsini walls, let alone that iron dome crap, AMJ added, eyes intent on Dover before darting back to Reuter. We won't be going through, Reuter assured, hand tapping his shoulder as he made his way to the front of the boat as it washed ashore. Don't you say the sewers. I'm too old for that dirty shit. Chair shook his head. Smuggler tunnels litter that side of the coast. Take us right through their back door. I don't like it, AMJ growled. Too easy for you. Grimmy chuckled through comms as voices from the lookout trickled down to the small cove they'd washed up on. Sharp rocks and patchy beach could be seen leading up to the mouth of the cave. See that? They riddle this side of the coast. Easy means drama. Reeks of a setup. Say they block the tunnels. Hope so. Light's para meme explode across their visors. Our mole didn't mention the tunnels, just key locations. Besides, tunnels are old news. Chair swept the meme from his visor. No one knows they there. Forgotten knowledge. He smiled, tapping his head. If it's forgotten, how do you know about it? Dumbass. I know useful shit. No such thing as useful shit, you cagey fucker. AMJ mumbled on, eyes narrowing suspiciously on their most recent recruit from Special Branch. Well, the wife enjoys throwing it, Burlow chuckled. Made a sport of it, really. And teamwork makes the dream work, Grimmy sniggered. But that was all they had time for, as back at Base Geek activate visor footage. We're live, boys. Code for the grown-ups are listening. Reuter cast a rope for him to tie off before jumping out the boat, icy water splashing about his legs as he helped the others drag it ashore. They'd arrived. Chapter 25. Back at base, Hobbs' sober expression reflected back in large immersive screens from where he stood, looming over Geek's shoulder. They covered multiple strategic points across Europe, while a tubby man sat some way behind them, feet up on a desk, shoveling crisps and Merlot into his mouth, packet rustling between slurps and silent tension, causing Hobbs' fist to ball up. Arden marveled at it, washing back another thistle of crisps with a slurp of Merlot. He stood. You look like it's your first time. He eyed Hobbs' rigid stance before offering him a glass, which, Arden smiled, might as well have been a hooker at church. Without so much as a word, Hobbs turned, glaring back at the screens where Geek proceeded with checks and cloaking, keeping their boys hidden. He watched as they broke off into teams. Reuter, JK, and Malau led crews up through separate caves, branching out under Dover's fort. Close to the sea and overhanging the cliffs, Malau and his team were first to reach their target and Volkov's first arm of defense, their military lookout. High Wind wasted no time, hacking an external control panel for the armored door blocking their path. After just a few moments, he stood aside with a theatrical bow as it hissed open to the surprised looks on the guards inside. Schwartz and Slumber slid straight between their legs, each throwing an uppercut as they went, toppling the guards and continuing on toward the control room. Smokey, Ted, and Malau took care of the others, who'd surfaced out of side rooms at the sounds of commotion. With a cuss, Slumber watched more charge their way as an alarm rang out. A river of bodies soon littered the hall, though more continued to surface. Batons and body armor like thunder where they clashed. Shields up! Slumber barked down comms before chucking a taser grenade overhead. It spider-webbed off guards, dropping at least 20 before he continued enjoying himself with a little more hand-to-hand. Malau, meanwhile, tore out the door's control panel, triggering the safety mechanism and auto-lockdown of the lookout. Doors sealed off, locking them in, blocking out reinforcements. His boys seemed to be enjoying the brawl, and striding over the backs of guards who'd been toppled, he sent a series of precision blows clearing the rest. Stop playing, he barked, continuing on toward Highwind, who was about to blow the door to the control room. Rachmaninoff's Italian polka danced through Smokey's headset as the door flew off its hinges, and he began his artful assault on the guards who staggered out. Blinded by smoke, thrown off by the blast, they were easy pickings. Schwartz covered Zeke and Highwind as they made for the offline key. Within minutes, they'd managed to locate it and plant the dongle, allowing Geek to access the mainframe, taking control. Peering back down the hall, Malone could see Cloudy, and the rest of the boys had taken care of the few remaining guards that now carpeted the hall and were being disarmed. "Lookout secure," he radioed through to Geek at HQ. Asterisk. Quattra's hand slapped into Millie as their night vision faltered, shells crunching underfoot as they ventured on, through the maze of tunnels further inland. "Could be walking into anything," he growled, lighting a flare. But from in Mobius, Grace could see they were on the right track, and instead her attention caught on the shells coating the cave's floor, could feel the intricate overlay of patterns, their logarithmic spiral mapping everything, from the structure of the universe to the network of nerves in her eye. It occurred to her that the keys to understanding the cosmos were hidden in the smaller details. A rare snapshot of uncensored history across worlds, across species, and more. Can't beat old reliable. AMJ drew her attention back to the group as comms cut out. Pulling out a paper map, he tapped his head. "That's why we keep you about," Lilibet grinned, eyeing damp walls of the tunnel they now funneled along. "Age beats beauty." "Only 'cause it's fucking jealous," Reuter chuckled, jumping in. "Screw you lot," AMJ grumbled once more. Staring at the map, he continued, directing them through tunnels that forked. A while later, their footsteps came to a stop. "We're lost, aren't we?" Quattra groaned. "Course not. Following the map, and my intuition." AMJ's brow furrowed, turning the map clockwise, then back. "We're, if we keep..." But voices began to trickle down from above. "Your gatehouse," AMJ whispered, gesturing overhead, hoping to waft away any relief he felt as their last flare dimmed out. Just around the next bend, light pooled on the floor, and peering through the grating above, they found themselves under the mess and rec room that resembled more of a brothel at this time of night. Millie glanced up at the girl overhead. "Well, I'm starting to feel a little overdressed," he chuckled. Grabbing the map, Reuter strained under limited light. "Where have you taken us?" "Place you don't mind getting screwed." Maestro chuckled, nudging Jones. "Followed his intuition, didn't he?" Quattro joined as comms crackled intermittently, trying to reconnect to HQ. Pocketing the map, Reuter pulled out a canister. "We're not far from the gatehouse. Seal up," he warned before activating the thing, a stream of gas hissing out to the room above. Meanwhile, JK's team had surfaced under the keep, in an old storeroom. Curly threw open a swing door into the back of a guard's head, chucking another to the floor, a pressure point quickly rendering the first unconscious. Burlow followed out, JK and the others close behind. Dodging a few blows, it took all three to tackle the giant of a man that came charging their way. Tossing a taser grenade at another running to sound the alarm, Lights watched it spark, bolts of electricity spiderwebbing over the guy as he fell and cracked his head. "Minimal casualties," JK barked. "Subjective, I know." Lights grunted back, throwing another and watching several more convulse to the floor. "Stop tasering them. Just knock them out." Lights seemed to take that on board, skimming the next across the heads of two more who tumbled to the floor before it activated. "With this," JK held up a canister. "Put him to sleep." "You want me to tuck him in too?" Lights laughed, watching JK ram the guard on his back into a wall. Sev darted a handful who tried to run off, while Flacco, Hoarder, and Cam battled their way through the few remaining between them and the spiral staircase. Finally clear, they made their way up narrow winding steps to the first floor. As Sev led them through dark passages, thermal imaging blanket everything in a rainbow of color, and having reached the great hall, she stood aside to cover the door, waving others past. The guards inside appeared more preoccupied with keeping guests from leaving than guarding the entrance. Lights felt his finger tighten round the trigger as one of the men in the hall began beating some of the women there. AI flashed up with the guy's biometric markers, Dimitri, a notorious bastard. But Sev's nudge brought him back to task. Placing a gas canister behind a guard, he moved on. They could handle that asshole once they had Dover. They moved up the next spiral staircase, toward the king's chamber, where the second offline key was supposedly located, according to their mole. With Dmitri preoccupied downstairs, the others moved on to secure the roof. Striding into the chamber, Curly realized too late he wasn't alone. Reaching for his gun, eyes pinned to the shadows that moved. He'd seen many things before, but none that had left him speechless. A figure emerged out of the shadows, timeless seconds passing between them. She had the face of an angel, though bruised and bloodied where she glanced at the painting beside him. "It's all there." She gestured, moving to open it. "You're the mole, but you're—" "His wife," she conceded, standing aside. Not all men were meant to lead. Back outside, the others continued up towards the roof, snaking through narrowing corridors when blue hues of light seared past, plowing into stone, sending shards scattering. "Shields!" JK boomed, diving for cover as a laser grenade tumbled after them, but his refused to power up. Chapter 26. An explosion lit the space, slamming them against castle walls as electrical bolts spiderwebbed about. Shizzle and lights huddled round JK, offering limited protection as the force battered their suits, leaving surrounding rock seared and smoldering. The smell of burning flesh permeated the air where JK slumped, smoking. "Thought you quit," Burlow drawled, expression damp. He knelt to inspect the damage as lights tossed a taser grenade back, its plasma orb sending bolts of electricity to clear out the halls ahead, disabling the few remaining guards. The group pressed on, dragging JK through crumbling walls which threatened to crash in on them. When Reuter and his boys finally surfaced from the tunnels, they could hear alarms ring out as Geek's relief flooded in. "Starting to worry about you lot. Look out and keep her secure. You got 5 minutes until keys self-destruct, unless you reset the alarm or connect the third." "Copy that." Burlow, Sev, and Horder positioned themselves to provide cover from on top of the keep, as Reuter's team jetted to the roof of the gatehouse, firing at the guards defending it. But as Airy came to land, a bullet plowed into the side of his jetpack, safety eject throwing him over the edge. Plummeting toward the ground, Maestro's grapple hook caught and hoisted him unceremoniously back to where he dangled like a fish until Millie could yank the kid in his armored suit back over the edge. Much to the old boy's amusement, he watched the kid jump to his feet and continue the fight with all the more gusto. Having secured the roof and forced entry to the gatehouse below, Chair let out a lengthy cuss, fist plowing into the table as Reuter peered over his shoulder. "Dongle won't connect to that, not unless you got a floppy or something old school." Router chuckled. "A shoelace work?" "It would if I were there." AMJ crackled back through comms as Geek cut in. "Chair, your suit's autofix has a 3D printer. It's a small piece of kit, but should work." "Less of the small." Chair smiled, ejecting the processing unit for his suit's autofix. "Gonna need a minute. Never been asked to make anything floppy before." As Chair cracked on with a fix, Lilibay secured the window with Reuter. "Always pictured you as the performer of the group," Reuter jest. "Us firemen catch the imagination, boss." X. Once a fireman, always a fireman. "And our Lil Irish leprechaun," Chair added with a chuckle, picking off guards below from where he stood at the window. "Little. Got the luck of the Irish, mate," Lilibay scoffed. Out of ammo, Chair resorted to throwing components out of the window, knocking off a few guards climbing the walls. The Volkov, meanwhile, had set fire to the gatehouse and begun to ram the door below. Reuter watched as the old wood downstairs began to smoke and spit. "Could use some of that Irish luck about now." On the roof, the rest of the boys fought back the Volkov mob who'd amassed below. Thousands, it seemed. Ari and Lilibay picked off those climbing ladders and using auto-grapplers to try and reclaim the gatehouse roof while Millie, AMJ, Quattro, and Grimmy picked off those who got past. There were so many. They were completely surrounded, heavily outnumbered, ladders and auto-grapplers relentless. The Volkov determined to reclaim the gatehouse or have fire take it. Back at the keep, Lights and Curly battled to overpower the guards that breached the narrow stairwell. Shizzle arrived just in time to help push back through the narrow staircase. While at the lookout, an explosion ripped through the sidewall, catching them all by surprise, sending Malau, Zeke, and Schwartz flying. Chalky clouds heavied the air where they lay among fallen bricks and mortar, still as stone. Icy fingers crept up Geek's spine as he saw the first 3 body cams flicker out. "Malau!" Zeke, Schwartz, do you copy? His voice washed out over black screens and static. Highwind's voice finally trickled back through. Look out, breached, out, Mo. Back at the gatehouse, Ari's gun clicked a couple times as well, out of bullets. Using the back of it, he bat a couple guards from the roof. While at the keep, JK's head fell back on cold stone, having briefly lost consciousness. Grace watched him wash past in Mobius, his entire life in a breath. From blue ice cream, table tennis, and the day he got married, to the day his path crossed routers and all this stuff that followed. As Grace zoomed out, she could see his life, adventurous as it was, just a single stitch in this living tapestry, helping to hold others around it in place. But as his STEM CPAC filtered through his system, it began repair, allowing JK to return to his form, back to the cold stone he lay on. Forcing his eyes open and his legs to stand, charred skin that had fused to armor tore. Raw tissue wet between plates where he leant at an arrow slit to line up a shot. Sit down, AMJ barked at JK, whose vitals flashed up on their feed. Less you got a death wish. I'd miss your mum too much, JK wheezed, pain cutting his chuckle short, the gun's recoil punching into raw flesh. Growling, he shot another on top of the gatehouse, wrestling with Ari, as thunder cracked overhead and it began to rain. Someone up there taking the piss. He scowled up, unmoved. Meanwhile, Router stared down at the doors that buckled, straining to hold back the mob outside and then to chair. He wasn't yet close to a fix. They needed more time. Where are you going? To buy time. Reuter strode back out onto the roof of the gatehouse. Hooking a couple of grapplers on the wall, he fired up his jetpack. The screams of the Volkov he dragged off the wall, harrowing as they fell, before he continued up into the night sky toward the formidable Iron Dome. Let's see what you got. AMJ stared up, Reuter's feet on their visors. Holy mother of... He breathed, realizing what he was up to. Grace felt her heart pound with Router, AI alerts flashing up with his vital signs and selected trajectory as Geek buzzed in. Nearly out of fuel, mate, and you're heading right into that Iron Dome. Net's still live. Reuter braced, G-force increasing with speed. Wanna fill me in? What's the plan? Router! Get air on. Stand by. Reuter managed. Copy, ready and waiting. Color drained from Geek's expression as he realized Router was about to use himself as bait, turning the Volkov net and all their missiles against them. Chapter 27. From in the control room, seated behind Hobbs, Arden brimmed with excitement, Merlot splashing into his glass for the third time in just a few minutes while he dusted crisps from his shirt. Blau's eyes were fixed on the screen, however, listening intently to Geek, who radioed through to Router. What in God's name is he up to? Hobbs thundered, roar splashing coffee over Geek's projections as Grace jumped from in Mobius. Hold back on air support till the signal. Geek shot back before glancing at Blau. Reroute specs, prioritize thrusters and shielding. Blau's fingers hammered away over keys as Hobbs begrudgingly rang through to air support. Much as he needed Reuter's success, he couldn't help but hope he fail. That would knock him off that pedestal the boys placed him on rather nicely. But Router always pulled it out the bag. Hobbs' jaw firmed, God knows how. The guy was a maverick. Maximize thrusters, adjusting primaries to shielding. Once done, the silence was deafening. All they could do now was watch and wait. Reuter's sats plummet as he shot up like a bullet, suit piercing the dome. He cut engines and tailed back, missiles having locked on. Maxing out speed on descent, he struggled to remain conscious, blood pressure dangerously low. Hang in there, Router. Geek's voice broke through the static, pulling him back. But the outside of his armored suit burned, resistance buffeting it, excess heat causing parts to malfunction, and comms to cut out completely. The rest of the team on the ground watched him meteor down, having lost control. No! AMJ's own suit spluttered where he hammered the ignition, but it refused to take off, completely out of fuel. He watched Router's unconscious form tumble, missile gaining on him. Geek's head slipped into his hands, unable to watch. As Router fell, missiles gaining, Flacco slammed into the side of him, his mid-air tackle throwing both of them out the way of the oncoming missile, which sliced past and did an about turn to continue its pursuit. Flacco darted toward the gatehouse, coming into a bumpy landing as he fired up thrusters. One spluttered, hemorrhaging fuel where they'd come under fire. Struggling under the increased weight, it cut out completely, sending them bowling into the outskirts of the mob surrounding the gatehouse. Rolling to a halt, he punched the remaining thruster, and like a grasshopper, they sprung aside, narrowly avoiding the missile where it hit. From where he lay, Reuter's shield dimmed out. Flacco's flickered intermittently from his motionless form. Stats were out, conserving power, and back at HQ, even Arden's rustling had stopped as they stared at the few remaining screens watching the dust settle. The impact had decimated half the Volkov mob outside the gatehouse, shaking the very foundations and sending part of the perimeter wall tumbling down and many more. An almighty cheer ripped through HQ as Flacco groaned and rolled to his side. From where he lay in mud and between chunks of mortar, Router could hear a dull, monotone alarm blanket everything. As he stared up through his broken visor, it seemed to grow louder. Pushing it back, he could see the gatehouse, which, unlike him, was still standing, as was much of the perimeter wall. He hadn't managed to punch a hole big enough for any significant advantage. They'd lost. Straining to sit, he battled against bent armor before managing to prop himself against a pile of fallen men as he pulled off his helmet, the pain in his leg burning. Gain of function error. Stem C rinse incomplete. Error. Error. Router's vitals could be heard, flashing red on the discarded visor as he caught sight of Flacco hobbling about in the rubble, retrieving guns and anything else of use. It was only then that he noticed some of the bodies had begun to move, a few rising up. It seemed they weren't the only lucky survivors. Hobbling to his feet, he and Flacco backed toward the wall as Reuter tried his jetpack again. Smoking, it puffed out. Flacco's shield now dimmed as he pointed his remaining thruster at the approaching guards, only for it to wheeze and splutter. Always did prefer an old-fashioned. Flacco picked up one of the guns he scavenged and chucked another at Reuter. "We ain't walking out of this one," he growled, casting an eye over Router's battered form and the Volkov who began circling. Router straightened, taking aim as he noticed the guard's distraction overhead. "You got a wife and kids to come yet?" He smiled. "Family never was my thing," Flacco offered with a resigned smile. But it was only then that he caught sight of Millie and the boys who'd flown overhead, providing cover as Burlow and Grimmy scooped them up. As the group spluttered down onto what remained of the perimeter wall, Reuter gave Flacco a tired smile. "Family's worth having." He slumped to the floor between the lads who took formation. He was now very pale, having lost a lot of blood, guards having scrambled up either side of the wall. Quattro, Millie, Router, and Grimmy took up position on one side, with Flacco, Burlow, Hoarder, and Lights on the other. Router sat trying to fix his stem C rinse that refused to power up, managing to dodge stray blows from his men as they moved, battling guards back. Grace could see they were badly outnumbered, but at least on high ground with narrow access, they'd placed a stranglehold on any attack. "Comms still down," Flacco grumbled between blows. "HQ don't want to hear your belly aching," Burlow teased. "Those who can, get back to the gatehouse," Reuter ordered, their situation here hopeless. "And let you have all the fun." Kotra shook his head along with the others, but Grace could see they were exhausted. Down to hand-to-hand combat, it seemed hopeless. "Hit 'em, boy," Millie barked at Flacco. "I did. I spanked the missus harder than that," he roared, picking up a guard and bowling him down the aisle, knocking a few more over before a shot pierced his side. Grace could see that, although Millie had slapped on a stem patch, he'd lost a lot of blood. Lilib struggled in his armor. It had taken quite a battering. Weakened and unable to move properly, it wasn't long until a Volkov shot ripped through, piercing his side. Blood splattered between breaths. His lung pierced. He slumped beside Reuter, activating his suit's stem C and hormone rinse. Within seconds, it flooded his cells, speeding repair to damaged tissue and stimulating internal clotting to prevent more blood from filling his lungs. Burlow fought on as Router spoke to Lilabe, his voice tethering the lad to the land of the living. "You still owe me that pint." But the lad's head fell back on cold stone, eyes glazing over. "Don't you bail on us," Router barked. Gold eyes glossed as he shot the booster he'd been salvaging from his battered suit, his only working stem C rinse into Lilabe. He watched, helpless, as the bloody tragedy unfolded in slow motion. Lilabe dying in his arms, the monotone ringing in his ears dulling the sounds as his boys fought bravely. Everything so vivid, their slaughter, eerily calm. His kid, Alex, would be waking next to his wife about now and his thoughts pulled to them. To their peace in that beautiful moment where he kissed them goodbye and offered up a prayer to see them again, in this world or the next. Dodging another friendly blow as his lads fought on, a guard managed to break through. Holding him in a chokehold, Reuter continued applying pressure to Lyle Abe. Looking out over their losing battle, blood and twilight was suddenly lit by fire from heaven. Raining down, thousands of SMC jet suits flamed overhead where they shot over the fortified port and came into land. Bullets plowed into the ground surrounding Reuter and his team, pushing guards back as reinforcements land between them, forming a protective shield. Reuter's eyes squeezed shut on the image of his wife and kid. Chair must have done it, got it working. Geek had opened the Iron Dome, let in air support. SMC reinforcements continued to pour in for quite some time after Reuter and his boys had been extracted, and Reuter found himself watching impatiently from the sidelines while they checked them over in Med Bay, a refashioned cargo drone hovering just offshore, high above the action. From there, he saw them secure battlegrounds. Supplies that had hovered offshore with them began to move in without him. Huge armored cargo drones. It felt surreal. Time down there had flown. But up here, just the last hour had felt like a lifetime. The Volkov were completely overwhelmed and Reuter had J.K., Millie, Malau, Schwartz, and Lilabe flown back to the Netherlands, where state-of-the-art STEM C-pods and the specialist care of Dr. Becker waited. Her hologram argued quite convincingly for Reuter to join them, but he firmly declined. Having managed to secure an alternative suit and complete a STEM C rinse, he was feeling much better. With him back on his feet, they didn't have a chance of sending him anywhere until the rest of his boys were done here. Clipping in a spare jetpack and extra cylinder, he bid good day to Dr. Becker's hologram, which now seemed rather exasperated, before blazing down to their new base, where he could see some commotion had broken out by the keep. Chapter 28. "I'll have you for this, all of you," Dmitri thundered, staggering around the keep, using one of the girls as a shield. Giving Reuter a welcome slap on the back, Burlow gestured over to Dmitri, waiting for the jetpack to shut down before he cared to elaborate. "He don't seem to realize the situation," he offered as the noise dampened, enjoying the wry smile that lit Reuter's face. Breathing in the rare scent of blood and mud in fresh morning air, Reuter took a moment to soak it up. Victory. They'd heard much of Petrov's troublesome brother, and Dmitri didn't disappoint. Even the looks on his men's faces from where they sat captive suggested they preferred their current situation. "Something tells me this ain't a first." His smile widened, turning his attention to Dmitri. "It's over, mate. Your boys surrendered." "I'm surrounded by weakness," Dmitri spat, glaring at his men. "You're hiding behind a skirt, calling them weak?" Reuter's face shone with amusement, where he turned to address those held captive. "You become like those you follow. I'm glad we arrived before that happened." Reuter spun on his heel to face Dmitri. "I suggest you put her down before Burlow here gets upset." "I don't intend on dying," Dmitri growled, pressing the knife to her throat, drawing blood. From 30 foot across the yard, Burlow's knife thudded just below Dmitri's elbow, severing his flexors and sending his knife clattering to the floor. "My arm!" he shrieked. "Look what you've done to my arm!" Reuter gave a curt nod. "Seen him do that from 3 times the distance. You're lucky we need you alive." He gestured for medics to see to the wound before turning his attention to equipment and supplies that had been flown in. "I'll have you for this, Reuter. Mark my words." Asterisk. "Where you want her," Cam cut in, having marched Dmitri's wife up to Reuter, who eyed her bruises. "Med Bay, then put her with the others." From across the yard, Curly jogged up to object. "Boss, you should know that." But he stopped having caught Mia's wide-eyed plea to stay quiet. "Just that I'm heading that way." He shrugged. "I can take her over." As they strode toward Med Bay, Curly spoke softly. "I could have explained," he offered, eyeing the bruises that tarnished her otherwise flawless complexion. "Told him you were the mole. If my husband suspects, if anyone suspects what I did," Curly caught the flash of fear in her eyes. "Dmitri's not going anywhere. He's done. He can't hurt you anymore. He is currency, as am I. Petrov holds your men." Her gaze flicked back to Reuter. He will let us go. Exchange us. Curly caught her arm. You don't have to go back. Router wouldn't force you. With a sympathetic smile, she retrieved her arm. He has my children. Curly walked the rest of the way in silence before reluctantly handing her over to be processed along with the other hostages at Medbay. Asterisk. By lunch, Router and his team had secured the port and most of the castle grounds. He took the opportunity to ring through and check on the others now back in the Netherlands. VR immersed him in Medbay as though there in person, seeing Millie, Lilabe, Schwartz, and Malau still resting. JK, on the other hand, sat propped up, wide awake, eagerly waiting for the chance to find out what was happening back at Dover. They still out, Reuter chuckled, warmth in his wry smile. You should be resting too. Some of us don't need no beauty sleep. JK smiled before ushering Reuter on with his update, knowing he could be called away at any moment. Having caught up with what was happening on the ground, Reuter moved on to their plans for Dmitri. He's a nasty piece of work. JK didn't bother to hide his disgust, and Router's slow nod seemed to agree. He'll get what's coming to him, he assured. Just not this time. You can't be serious. They're letting him go? Petrov's a smart man. He wants to trade Nomi and Cosmo for Dmitri and his wife. Hobbs is on board, and for once, I agree. Though clearly troubled by the idea, JK gave a thoughtful nod as Geek buzzed through, and Router merged the call, VR overlay blanketing projections as Geek flashed up with Hobbs hovering in the background. Other teams have managed to demolish key Volkov European weapons factories and transport links across Europe. Our coordinated attack was a success. Europe is ours. Hobbs strode into focus, bringing you in for debrief. I'll head back in a few days, Reuter insisted, watching Hobbs's fist clench. VR debrief then. Won't take long. Tomorrow, Reuter agreed with a curt nod. I've a few things to round up first. Dimitri's to be kept alive. Agreed, Reuter rang off. Having left JK with strict instructions to get some much-needed beauty sleep, Reuter made his way back outside, rattling through orders to seal up tunnels and arrange repairs to the perimeter wall before consulting Geek about security improvements to the Iron Dome. Asterisk. Meanwhile, in the rec room, Burlow and some others were lugging through supplies that drones had delivered for their new base. An ORIF, open reduction internal fixation. Horder rattled on as they began to unload supply crates, gesturing to his knee. Sounds like a euphemism, Maestro grinned. A pin in my leg, dumbass. So you finally got screwed? Horder chuckled. You're showing your age, mate, with all them dad jokes. It's an art form, really. Thinks he's a regular Van Gogh. Horder jest, turning to the rest of the lads. Nah, I'm all ears. Maestro smiled sweetly, sitting for what felt like a long overdue break. Give us a hand with this, lad. Quattro waved over one of the men who'd worked under Dmitri. What you go by? Kubi, the lad uttered, a little unsure as his gaze fell to the weapons lying about. Never used 'em, have you? Quatter smiled at the lad's stare. Never learnt how to fight either, huh? The kid's gait and arm said about as much. You want to? He chuckled at the eager look in the kid's eye. Give me a hand then. Rest of 'em can't drink and work. Ain't Cornish like me. Asterisk. Back inside the keep on the upper floors, Router sat staring at the mixed reality projection of Hobbs and the rest of the boys at HQ, having given them an update. As they drew to a close, Hobbs looked markedly more settled. What about new recruits? Not a bad selection. Take about a year to train up, though. Any particular talent? Time will tell. Several have potential. There's one that would do well with AMJ. He admitted reluctantly as Hobbs laughed. Mentoring was not in AMJ's vocabulary, and he proved incredibly creative in avoiding it. I haven't broached it with him yet. Timing's everything. Chapter 29. Washing through Mobius, this living archive, immersed and enmeshed in the stories of those contained within it, Grace could feel Velda's sense of rising panic. She sat scouring radio waves only to hear reports of last night's events at Dover. With the British government having fallen and no military force left, there was no one to hand the keys back to. Downing lumpy gray proneutrino, she slammed the tin cup back on the side before hammering away on a punch bag she'd fashioned out of rubber tires and rope. Keys to England. Sweat bead on her brow, fists slamming a double uppercut before finishing off with a back kick. Like hell she'd let them keep it. She wouldn't be surprised if they'd been the ones behind the blitz, ensuring there was no one left to hand it back to. The walls of the small basement felt as though they were closing in. Clipping in a couple of Glocks, she threw on a jacket and grabbed her bag. Free running through what resembled a ghost town, she flew through dead streets, over burnt-out cars, and scrambled up window bars and onto a roof. Sailing between buildings with a series of jumps and rolls, the rush, the reaction. Not even her thoughts could catch her. Nothing existed here but instinct and adrenaline, the wind in her hair, and the earthy, wet smell of concrete and new beginnings. Finally slowing to a stop, legs refusing to go on, she sat atop a parking lot, gaze falling over their dying city. Her attempts to rally the troops had been unsuccessful. Crime syndicates and mercenaries had begun carving it up. The sun sank below the horizon, and with it, their world into darkness. Grace watched weeks roll by. Cities became largely unrecognizable as the Volkov and other crime syndicates battled the SMC for key strongholds, and what little remained of civilized empire returned to dust. Asterisk. Ink tells a story, Smokey drawled as twilight broke, clipping on a long-range scope, lining up a shot next to Burlow, who eyed his many tattoos. You should try it. Speaks volumes. Every line on my face does that, Burlow muttered, attention on the 4x4 that had rolled up, gesturing to AMJ a few yards away. It was time. All eyes were on the runway where Rotor stood to meet the 4x4 in today's long-awaited exchange. Despite their combined experience, the nature of today's job meant tensions were high. Disapproving eyes ran over Dimitri and his missus as they climbed out and made their way past Nomi and Cosmo, who limped toward Rotor, looking far from their best. It had been a few weeks since they'd taken Dover, and today's hostage exchange was long overdue. So that's the man, the legend, the monster. Petrov, AMJ mused. Out in the open. He should in theory have burst into flames by now. Sunlight and all that. One can only hope. AMJ's finger hovered round the trigger. One shot, that's all it would take to rid the world of a monster. But to Grace's surprise, Petrov's steely grays cut across the runway and fixed right on her where she hung behind AMJ, far off in the tree line. Creepy fucker. AMJ shifted uncomfortably as the corner of Petrov's mouth pulled back in amusement. Eyes pinned to Grace. To her horror, she seemed to have gone from bystander to person of interest and could feel him forcibly rooting through her mind, thoughts, actions, lingering on location. It seemed a silent threat. And I know where to find you. To her relief, it was over quickly as Dmitri and his wife climbed into the armored 4x4. Petrov followed in one lithe move before they sped off. Asterisk. That morning, Annika woke in a cold sweat, blinking back the sight of those steely grays, the man's face shrouded in shadow. She'd been sat in a cafe in her dream, talking to him at length, when all of a sudden, she gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby. Out of her mouth. Yes, in her dream, her baby came out of her mouth in front of everyone. More surprising still, nobody seemed to think it odd except her. Grace watched Annika toss and turn, trying to focus on the soft pillow beneath her head, trying to seep under the cool waters of her imagination again. But they seemed tidal, having withdrawn completely. Looking enviously at Alessandro, who slept next to her, her eyes narrowed on the clock. 3 a.m. Begrudgingly, she pushed back her side of the blanket and pottered to the kitchenette in their cold, empty flat, lit by twilight. May as well make myself useful, she supposed. Sinking into a chair under the moon's silver glow, she fired up an old laptop that whirled its objection. It was around 8 a.m. when Alessandro placed a fresh coffee beside her, smiling down at the data Annika had managed to collate. Rare to find anyone else who lives and breathes data, he chortled, marveling at the unique connections she'd found. Occupational hazard. She breathed in the coffee. They'd managed to amass a large group of hackers, cypherpunks, and rebels from across the globe. Trawling through the data which had flooded in since Alessandro's leak proved more than a full-time job for the handful of them. Annika sighed. Looking back at her screen, she couldn't help but feel there was something they were missing. A connection. something that'd make all this madness make sense. But she hadn't found it yet. We've published so much. Why is no one listening? We're offering problems, not solutions. People can't handle the ones they got as it is. He gave a thoughtful nod, considering how best to broach the subject. And, he sighed, it matters who they hear it from. A guilty shade splashed across his face. Many still blamed him for this mess, and in truth, he blamed himself. If only we had someone who cared, someone the public would recognize, who fought for them to the very end. Part of the old system, but not embroiled in its corruption. Someone just like you, but Annika's eyes narrowed, catching his drift. She hates me. It's me she hates. Oh, well, that's problem solved then. Her eyes rolled off Alessandro and back to her screen. She's exhausted all other options, Alessandro ventured, and she needs you about as much as you need her. I've never needed anyone. Annika began clearing up the mess of papers on her lap. You have something she needs, global reach, and with our tech. He watched her still. She couldn't deny the spark of hope, that her elusive twin might stick around, spend time if they were building a way out of this mess together. But hope made it incredibly hard to maintain the stubborn stance she'd used to protect herself the past few years. Or are you going to let the future burn, all because you're afraid of a little pushback? Are you really that fragile? He smiled at the defiant glare he knew was coming. Fine, she growled, but if she bites my head off, you're one man down. Woman, one woman down, Alessandro corrected with a satisfied grin. Not when I point her in your direction. She watched his face turn satisfyingly gray at the thought. Asterisk. A few days later, Velda forced open a stubborn door in the abandoned warehouse she'd suggested the informant meet her at, foot quickly barring entry. To Velda, it seemed like looking in a mirror, one that reflected all the poor choices she'd managed to avoid so far, where she eyed the tatty clothes and scruffy red head on her twin, green eyes sparkling back expectantly. Rest of the CSI crew in there, Catherine? Annika grinned, watching Velda smooth down her blouse and brown leather jacket. It saddened her to see her twin's unruly curls straightened out, eyes having lost the sparkle they once shared. With a playful smile, she threw a glance behind the door to see Velda's foot in the way. My foot in my mouth usually does the trick. What was it Velda had called it? Verbal diarrhea. Annika's eyes sparkled up to see her twin's lips press firm, no trace of humor, not even a response. So that's what it would look like, she mused, if her soul ever left her body. I do have something that could help. Well, someone. She paused. It's a bit of both, actually, Annika rambled, wedging the projector on her watch through the narrowing gap in the door. Glaring at the flickering projection, Velda felt nails bite to the palms of her hands. It was the hacker and cypherpunk Alessandro Visser, who they tried to put behind bars after his data leak. The Blitz, however, had seen to it that may never happen. Her eyes pinched on the source of all their problems. She'd have slammed the door if Annika's arm wasn't already in it. He's responsible for all this, she snapped over his pre-recorded speech. That's a stretch. Releasing classified files leading to countless loss of life? Nearly my own. He shed light on abuse, war crimes, corruption, and he's responsible for all this. She glared at the dust and rubble behind Annika. Absolute chaos, the absence of all law and order, the devastation of our military bases, deaths of at least 300 special branch operatives, nearly my own, and yet saved hundreds of thousands more than your forces. Trust you to say that. What do you mean? That you're just the same, immature with no real concept of what's really going on. He's trying to help. He broke into top-secret files, unleashed chaos at the worst possible time, and triggered a global civil war. You can't pin all this on him. He published the truth. Truth is subjective. Only when you're hiding it. Annika's eyes tumbled with frustration and realization. You say I've no real concept of what's going on, but you're afraid of finding out. You haven't changed one bit, Velda snapped. You're still just as reckless, impulsive, and naive. Time you grew up, Annika, and face facts. Her eyes fixed on Velda. You want facts? We've got them. Raw data. See for yourself. Those correct channels. They were traps for whistleblowers. Annika's chin jut forward, watching Velda's mouth thin. You really want to make a difference? Prove it. We have a plan. We have resources. Use that training of yours. Look at the facts. What you got to lose. Chapter 30. Rare snow fell over the white-capped peaks surrounding Lake Como in northern Italy as Petrov sat with his brother, overlooking as old rosewood chessboard. A post-Christmas lull hung in the air as exhausted nieces and nephews finally settled off to sleep. There were few civilized places left since the troubles began, and this remained one of Petrov's most treasured. Dmitri's wife now cleared their empty glasses, quick to retrieve her hand and allow her sleeve to fall back over the large bruise Petrov was eyeing. Startled, she straightened and hurried out with their empty glasses. "Why?" Petrov inquired once the door to his study clicked closed, watching Dmitri's tongue-rimmed mottled teeth. "Mind your own business." "It's not your business I mind, it's the mistakes. Or have you forgotten, Dover? I warned you to seal up the tunnels." Dmitri glared at his younger brother for several long moments. "I was wondering when you were going to throw that in my face." "When will you learn?" "Mia's the one learning, not me." Petrov's mouth firmed as he moved his bishop across the board, recognizing his father's tone in Dmitri's voice. Rage is the voice of inadequacy, and pain strengthens your opponent, while kindness weakens them. You want to be more careful what you employ and with whom. They always said you were the smart one. Not since we lost Dover. That cost us. Petrov eyed his brother, who'd been in charge that night. SMC are a growing problem. Dmitri moved along, keen not to dwell on his own shortcomings, but not insurmountable. No? Petrov's stone expression fixed on the chessboard. They hold Europe for now, but not its people. The SMC excel in skill. They have better weapons, but they lack public appeal. We, on the other hand, are a family. People will fight for family, not for a military power. Dmitri's eyes narrowed on him, mouth souring. How do you do it? How do you always know what to do? People will tell you what they want if you care to listen. Petrov shrugged and moved his knight into place. Checkmate. He saw Dmitri's brow furrow. When you're familiar with the game, you can anticipate situations, but familiarize yourself with the player, and the game is yours. Pick that up from one of your books, Dmitri scoffed. Avoiding father's heavy hand, Petrov admitted, throwing back an espresso. You want to win. Patterns and perspective. That's all you need. He eyed his brother critically, and a little self-control. What are you going to do about Ivan? It will split the family when word gets out, and it will. No way round that. Dmitri smiled, enjoying the pressure being applied to his younger brother, but Petrov relaxed back in his chair, seemingly unfazed. The kid was proving troublesome, bright enough to secure blackmail material, stupid enough to think he could use it on them. There's always a way. As consigliere, Petrov was used to keeping the peace, managing people in impossible situations alongside running several businesses and emerging enterprises, which he either founded or provide substantial investment. The following morning, he sped down the meandering roads beside Lake Como towards his Milan office. Orsini Construction occupied the entire top floor. They specialized in eco-housing and on-site recycling of building waste, which they repurposed for 3D printing, for large-scale concrete construction. At his office, he finished up a meeting and rounded up a few matters before jetting off to London, England. The Volkov, the largest side of the 12-tribe family, had secured key areas in Africa and parts of Asia, while the rest of the family were making great progress across North America. Their rivals in the East proved to be a significant thorn in his side, and a private mercenary group, SMC, now dominated most of Europe thanks to his brother's shortcomings. As he sat back on the private jet, strong, lean fingers flicked through this new proposal. He found that times of trouble increased resourcefulness, accelerating creativity and ingenuity, igniting rapid advancement. A technical revolution was on the horizon, and he intended to keep himself and the family at his forefront. Although fiat systems had fallen flat in the wake of global civil war, blockchain technology had thrived long into the Troubles and allowed those with it to continue to buy and sell with relative ease. His eyes brushed over the projected cover of Vogue and the pretty brunette who was now a part of his business plan, his fiancée. Returning to the brief, he marveled at the advancements made. The tech industry's advancement was out of this world, but they paled in comparison to the whispers of genetic engineering at Morgan's clinic. Their initial paper was controversial, and any further advancements were simply the subject of rumor. But from experience, he found rumors of this nature were rooted in deception or revelation. It wouldn't take him long to establish which. A background check, an in-person chat, followed by a look around to get a feel for things. Instinct and intuition had always served him well. Pulling up on the east side of London a few hours later, he stepped out from his Maserati, draping his jacket over the back seat before rolling up crisp white sleeves, pleased with what he found so far. Dust and rubble lay either side of the old surgery, but striding down disheveled steps, he could smell it. Opportunity. Morgan glanced up from the old computer she tapped away on and dusted herself off as he strode in. Steely gaze flicking to where Grace watched him in Mobius, he smiled, before turning to Morgan's welcome. She breezed through a breakdown of what she'd developed so far, startled at the level of insight he showed in his line of questioning. When Petrov left over 12 hours later, he was surer than ever of their partnership. Morgan was a bright young scientist, desperate and hungry for progress, to push the limits of what was possible, and he was more than happy to pick up the tab. It wasn't just the large percentage of profit her work would likely yield, but her influence once he made her a household name. The fact of the matter was that this little endeavor would cost him pennies. The facilities she required could be constructed in-house through his own company, while his boys would ensure security, keeping them employed. It didn't hurt that he sensed something good about the deal either. He was continually planting seeds for the future, which as he stared out at the dust and rubble, looked very bright indeed. Asterisk. How did you come by all this? Velda stared at the holographic dossiers in disbelief before letting her gaze drift over the crumbling walls of Annika's flat. It was the stuff of nightmares. There was a world of difference between where they were and where they should be. Despondent, her gaze fell back to the old laptop and flickering projections, missing her desk and usual resources more than ever. She used to be able to make a difference. Reams of documents flickered through the old 3D projection, which, like her, may as well be extinct, given what they were up against. Her eyes glanced up at the narrow basement window. It felt about right. Her lips thinned. They were already about 6 feet under, though Annika hadn't seemed to realize. Whistleblowers. They sent it all in after Aile's initial leak. More than we could read in a year. AI helped us filter through and summarize. But the sources, the evidence, it's all there. Velda stared in disbelief. There was nothing to be done. What could be? They woke to a ticking time bomb too late. From proxy wars, human trafficking programs, eugenics and inhumane global human trials, to geoengineering aimed at controlling food and water supplies. It resembled the stuff of Nazi Germany on a global stage. The public, like cattle. Algorithms induced entire populations into a form of tonic immobility. Its main success, taking any humanity out of the decision-making process. Profits and power were paramount, while populations and their leaders were distracted by global conflict and political battles, consumed by consumerism. Others were hypnotized, absorbed in celebrity worlds or dizzied on social media platforms, unable to differentiate what was real from what wasn't. Humans were trained not to speak out, as the algorithm picked off those at the fringe who did, working to divide populations over time. People, even those behind the program, leaders of nations, became like cattle, reacting, not thinking, distracted, unable to see the bigger picture. Fear insisting, they placed blind faith in a self-learning system they could not fully understand or hope to control, in algorithms designed for war against people, against human concerns. In effect, they taught themselves to bake the bricks for their own abattoir. From the processed food they bought to the sedentary lifestyle they claimed, social norms became a tyrannical dictator, turning work ethic into the notion that work makes one free. Those who prioritized family networks and nurturing roles were ostracized by their community, and a person's value was determined by income, leaving few nurturing figures paying attention to what was happening. Groups who were different, individuals who were vulnerable or dependent, were deemed not human and slaughtered or exploited, encouraged to sell parts of themselves morally or physically. Prolonged, high-stress states lowered energy levels and left people prone to distraction, burnout, and herd mentality. Many were riddled with physical and psychological illness as a result of family breakdown, lack of exercise, and poor diet, with 66% addicted to prescription drugs and 21% on illicit ones. The remaining 13% still depended on the monster of a system they had created, the algorithm which demanded profit and power before people, fostering addiction in all its forms. Farmland had been bought up, those who owned it forced out of business, and geoengineering rendered the little that was left largely unusable, the public eventually fully reliant on food printing and their manufacturers. It was painful to see how out of control, how utterly mad things had become. Velda's heart sank. The worst part was she wasn't sure she could see a way out of it. For those who came to power in that mess, how they could have possibly hit the brakes on it. All global powers had been running full steam toward a cliff edge, willing to compromise anything of others for an edge over their competition. Not one of them dared hit the moral brake for fear the others would overtake. They couldn't afford to lose the upper hand, their share of this monster. That would have doomed their population to whatever the new dominant power would force on them. So instead, they careered off the edge into these hellish depths together, a form of mutual self-destruction. "We can turn it around," Annika bounced out of her seat to Velda's annoyance, clearly oblivious to the reality they faced. "Together we can build something by the people, for the people, to fix—" But Velda shook her head, unsure where to start. "I don't know how to get them to listen, let alone trust again. People want to believe. Maybe before, but now?" Velda shook her head. It felt like she'd had the shit knocked out of her. Better out than in. The thought surfaced as Annika spun back from where she paced, clearly unable to sit. "People will listen. You just need the right platform, and they need someone to remind them that together we can build a world worth fighting for. We have no soldiers, no land, no weapons." "You don't need it," Annika said with a waft of her hand. "You just need the people. Give them hope, and they'll give you the rest." Chapter 31. Early the next morning, Velda climbed out of the manhole with a small bag from her boiler room to find Annika already waiting. Her eyes cast over a horizon of fallen concrete giants and rubble as a crimson sunrise spilt over the hill, glossing muddy puddles with heavenly color, painting over holes between broken concrete and twisted steel. Annika's sober expression locked with hers. She'd half expected Velda to run again, to have abandoned them, but she hadn't, not this time. Striding up to them and their battered minivan, Velda jumped in, and they sped off through the outskirts of London. There was much to be done, and not a lot of time. Watching Annika and the handful of others she and Alessandro had scraped together, Velda couldn't help but notice the sense of family between them. Not that they ever used the term. Much as she disapproved of her twin, she couldn't deny Annika had a rare talent for creating that sense of family all around her, no matter the people or situation. As days rolled by, they began drafting videos, trialing their approach and format. It didn't take long for them to begin churning out content, several videos a week, to the decentralized web. They were inspiring, motivating, and brought hope to everyday people who'd lost everything over the past few years of chaos. I'm joined today by ex-Special Branch operative Velda King. Her voice needs no introduction. The interviewer smiled back at Velda. "When the troubles broke out, you were introduced to us as the voice of reason. What would you say to the people now, given all that's happened?" Velda stared thoughtfully into the camera. "I'd say, choose what you want. If it's revenge, we can't help you with that. Those who view themselves as a victim or take the law into their own hands will never prosper. The troubles have taught us as much, but if it's a better life, a better future for your children you're after, now that we can help create." "How do you suppose we do that? What are your resources?" Velda laughed. "We have all the resource we need to make that happen on a global scale, if we work together. Mistakes we can learn from, if we care to. Each one of us has suffered. Each one of us lost something or someone dear in the troubles. But no matter how far forward we move, if you are looking back, you will always exist in that hell. Soak in its pain, revive old troubles, no matter how far removed they are, no matter how many years or generations pass. But if you want a better future, which I believe we do, we move forward, wanting the best for each other. Together. Velda sat forward, her interview streamed live on decentralized social media channels, drawing in hundreds of thousands of viewers. How would you propose doing that when there is no trust, where it's every man for himself? Be a woman, she laughed in light of all that had passed, before sobering. Look, hope's crushed, but it's still there. It's alive in each one of us. It's up to us how long we wait, how long we suffer, before we choose to grow. To create the environment, the community that nurtures not only us, but 1,000 generations. The SMC and others say you are destabilizing the order they try to create. Whose order? Theirs, a crime syndicate's, or those of a mercenary group? I'm all for rule of law and fair order, but I do not think any of us believe that is what they are offering. The reporter gave a slow nod. Many would argue they are a necessary evil, for some semblance of order and normality. Peace even. History and common sense beg to differ. What's the alternative? People realizing how important they and their local community are. With individual and community responsibility, we can deal with issues at the local level. Put local experts in charge of their respective fields. Together we can rebuild, form a technocracy, and not be dependent on those tyrannical forces, but instead be guided by intelligence and the will of the people. People do not want to keep fighting, let alone take on military forces. Nor do I. But submitting to tyranny does not negate the fight, it only prolongs it. Annika watched the numbers fly up from behind the camera. Over the following months, people watching began to bind together, form real communities again. As months rolled by, Velda's DeFi media campaign spread. Her ideas caught like wildfire, with her talks encouraging people to band together, look after each other, to think for themselves and create communities for their children to grow up in. Together they stood for something better, could see the world they hoped to claim back for their children one day. They began fighting back, sabotaging both the crime syndicates and SMC, burning crops before they fled occupied areas, so that those who seized their land had no food or people for labor. Neighboring communities made provisions for refugees fleeing, welcoming them as their own. Hidden away in Annika's tiny London basement, Velda stared into the camera yet again. We outnumber them. This world was made for life and those who cherish it, not for warmongers to carve up and consume. We are those in no man's land, the in-between. We stand together. We are we are the people, for the people, and this is our world. Annika grinned as numbers ran up. Just over 87 million views in a couple of hours. Velda had amassed a following on decentralized social media, giving talks online, engaging with the public, listening to all their concerns as she debated and pressed forward for positive change, for unity, structure, law, and fair order. She became a beacon of hope for people across the world as they translated her talks into many languages. It wasn't long before funds were pouring in from various communities in all manner of ways: gold, silver, Bitcoin, ADA, Doge, you name it. They were able to expand their team little by little as they began to promote the idea of a transparent technocracy, built by the people, for the people. Asterisk. JK's armored 4x4 flew off the road, rolling into a nearby field as a landmine exploded underneath it. He, Curly, Shizzle, and Highwind were sent tumbling about inside like a washing machine before rolling to a halt. Shizzle groaned from where he hung upside down. Next time, I drive, he muttered as JK cut him loose before helping Curly kick out the back window. Dragging the injured out, they radioed for assistance. Later that evening, they sat in medbay, STEM C pods humming away, speeding repair as Reuter sat with them, chewing over the mess they'd faced these past few months. Get some rest, Dr. Becker's voice cut in. You'll need it. Her smile carried with it heartfelt sympathy, but instead of heading to bed, Reuter marched into Hobbs's office. He blamed himself for not having pushed the matter sooner. They'd been struggling to hold ground for some time now, and the boys were running on empty. Civilians had destroyed crops and abandoned the land, leaving no food or labor. The only thing they left were landmines, homemade and non-lethal to their heavily armored 4x4s, but enough to cause more than a headache and drain vital resources. We can't keep on top of it, not if the people are against us. Reuter clicked the door closed and fixed on the tiny man with pinprick eyes hiding behind his sleek glass desk, glancing briefly to Arden, who stood at the bar pouring himself another drink. You're personable. Win them over. Hobbs returned to the brief in hand. Not as simple as that, sir. Charisma running low? Hobbs mocked, almost hopeful. He'd never liked the guy's popularity, though at times it proved useful. Ideology spreads further and faster. People won't rally behind military might unless they're frightened. Even then, it won't last. What do you propose? Arden perked up. 'Cause my good man, your boy Router here makes a valid point. People need a cause to fight for and a face they can love. He eyed Hobbs' disagreeable mug and then his own less-than-opulent reflection in the glass drinks cabinet, filled with all kinds of spirits. One they respect or revere, a parent to the nation as it were, not one to rule, you understand, just one to wave a flag, for us, a mothering sort of figure. You sound as though you have someone in mind? Matter of fact, I do. Arden pulled up Velda's projection. That rogue podcaster? Hobbs rubbed his brow. She's the one making all this bloody mess. Then she's aptly positioned to clean it up. Wouldn't you say? Arden retorted cheerfully as he found a dusty bottle of wine hiding at the back of Hobbs' cabinet. Women belong behind a sink with gloves and an apron? Hobbs muttered as his mouth pressed thin. Arden marveled at the miserable little man, who clearly lacked imagination as well as drive. But then, he thought, having refashioned the role and attire to his satisfaction, soapy bubbles, rubber gloves, and a lace apron that barely covered. She's a woman, an idealist. Special Branch seemed to approve. She's pretty and articulate. Of course they'd approve her as a poster girl. Still doesn't mean there's anything practical going on upstairs. With 500 million followers on X in just a few months, Arden straightened and began to pour himself a glass of Chateau Lafite. I'd argue it's of little relevance what is going on upstairs. All that matters is what the people see. Together, we will have the funding and the arms to implement anything. She can hand us the people, stabilize the land we take. With her on side, they will welcome us with open arms. Hobbs's hands rubbed the back of his balding head as it sank toward the table. She'd never sign up to it. We are everything she's fighting against. So we give her what she wants. Arden shrugged, watching as all coiled tension in Hobbs sprang loose, jumping to his feet, fist plowing into the table. We are not putting her in charge. I don't believe she wants that. We give her what she wants, the illusion of it, the illusion of doing some good and living a very, very comfortable life in the process. I don't like it. She doesn't seem reasonable or malleable. Arden shrugged. Baby steps, my man. No sense holding land we can't keep. Even my pockets aren't that deep. Our best bet is to secure her before the Volkov do. Besides, soak anyone long enough in your bathwater, you'll find they become pliable or drown. Chapter 32. Velda's eyes pinched on Hobbs, who stood on the other side of the table. Asshole, Grace heard her thoughts thunder. Velda eyed the face of the SMC, the largest private mercenary group, and their potential future partner. Arden, a U.S. ex-president who'd recently been providing much-needed funding for her team, sat between them, and Alessandro took up the other chair, next to the one Annika had left vacant. Velda didn't care to entertain the reason why Annika hadn't bothered to show up, reliably unreliable. Her salty gaze moved from the empty chair to skim the small but otherwise very comfortable London office Arden had offered as a no-strings olive branch. Absolutely not, she reiterated. It's non-negotiable. Hobbs' face flashed disgust, which he had the politic to try and hide, firm fingers brushing the sides of his mouth as his gaze shuddered. This is precisely why we need her, he reminded himself. It's why the people want her, will comply with anything she asks of them. With her face and branding, Arden's money and political expertise, and his own mercenaries, they would be unstoppable. If only the bitch would acknowledge sense behind the camera. With all due respect, he offered as diplomatically as his temper would allow, we don't have an option, not if we want to win this war. Inter will not be using children and their families as human shields. Have I made myself clear? Hobbs's eyes shot to Arden, who he knew to be a man of good sense. He offered an appeasing hand. Velda, your proposed technocracy relies on utilizing experts to operate in their respective fields, does it not? Ethically, Velda hastened to add. Of course, Arden continued. I'd ask you then to also consider the daily deaths amounting as a result of the troubles continuing longer than need be. Hobbes has offered a way to shorten the war by years. We do that. We save countless lives overall. But Velda shook her head. If we are half the people we claim to be, half of what Inter stands for, we will find another way. To her frustration, Arden chuckled. Don't be worrying about your legacy now, my dear. It's safe if you win. Write it as you wish. You will find war dirties even the cleanest of hands, but history and its heroes are written by the victors, washed and polished up nicely. Velda straightened. When truth dies, no amount of polish will mask its stench. Inter is the people's technocracy. There's a smarter way to go about it, I can feel it. But Velda instantly regretted using a reference to feelings given the expression it splashed across Hobbes and Arden. She glared at Alessandro. He had been listening intently, head bobbing from one side to the other before rubbing his brow. Arden had a point, but perhaps we're jumping the gun. Hobbes slammed back in his seat. He knew exactly what needed to be done. The only question was if he and his boys could carry this China doll and her team through it in one piece. Alessandro continued, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. The Syndicate, their strongest arm, the Volkov, have Ivan. From the intel my team pulled last week, it seems he's operating way outside of the cartel, making internal power plays. Large cracks are beginning to show, and it wouldn't take much to break things apart from the inside. If they're busy fighting each other, the world stage is ours. Cuts the war short without relying on human shields. Hobbes gave a slow nod. All I ask in that case is that, in the meantime, we have the opportunity to make life very comfortable for civilians already occupying certain territories close to key ports and our military bases. Cheaper housing, more benefits. If they choose to stay, the Volkov are less likely to bomb civilians, and if they do, it only strengthens the people's resolve against them. Velda's jaw clenched at the compromise. It was still human shielding, but it was the civilian's choice and would deter the Volkov from attacking strategic strongholds. She gave a curt nod. As long as those who wish to leave are not prevented. Of course, Hobbes gave a patronizing smile as he pulled up his next proposal. A counter-offensive. The 3D projection lit up over the table. Asterisk. Velda stormed into her apartment. The day should have felt closer to a win, so why was she so angry? Slamming, the door rattled and fell off its hinges, only to reveal Annika, standing in the hall, already poised to knock. Seems I don't know my own strength, she chirped, unable to appease the glare that now flicked between her and a mouse that ran for cover. I know the feeling, Annika thought, as she fumbled about with the flimsy plywood door, managing to wedge it back up, though rather precariously against its frame to eye her handiwork. Enough to stop small, unwanted guests, she ventured. But not all. Velda's gaze narrowed on her. Why are you here, now? You missed the meeting. The one thing I asked you to do. Annika couldn't contain her excitement as she chucked over the hardware wallet. What the hell is it? Velda bit back. I know how much you want to win peacefully. This might just be the ticket. Annika waltzed over to the fridge and retrieved the last of the canned Spam before making herself comfortable on the couch. Alessandro and I have been hacking Volkov servers for a while now, since we've got close with their competition and wanted to check the SMC were genuine about an alliance and not using it to set us up. She spluttered between mouthfuls. Showed him some transcripts last week, just stuff. But then, found Don's son, Ivan, taking liberties, making power plays behind his dad's back. Her face shone with excitement. He's been using a record his dad compiled, a dead man's switch of sorts. Way to take out the family should anything happen to him or his loved ones. Only thing is, his son got greedy. He started using it. She chucked the empty can in the bin. Ah, that beats the hell out of Proneutrino. She opened the empty cupboard and looked back at Velda. Got any more? No. Her twin snapped, glancing back at the ledger in hand. If she knew her sister, and she did, this would only mean trouble. Where'd you get it? Annika didn't answer, but her eyes sparkled with mischief. Another loan-op? You had that important meeting and... We had that important meeting. Annika shrugged. You were always much better at that sort of thing. Being responsible, Velda scoffed. It was a narrow window. Annika waltzed over to the chair and slumped into it. Just between us, it might be worth keeping whatever's on that ledger away from Hobbs and his boys. Right now, they need your help to deal with the Volkov and secure the people. But if that ledger's all it's cracked up to be, they won't need you for that. You've seen what's on it? Annika shook loose red curls. I've seen what they said about it, but it's encrypted. Will take time to hack. Asterisk. The following week, Arden's money had begun to flow in thick and fast for renovations and expansion of Inter's new offices in their attempt to avoid an about-turn from Velda. Hobbs's men were to help with the refurbishments. Velda couldn't deny things were a lot more comfortable since their partnership with the SMC, and life had become more peaceful for her people. Now they were on the same side and under their protection, although the additional personalities roaming the halls were beginning to grate. From inside their broadcast room, Grace watched Velda rattling off the lengthy list of items they were still waiting on for this afternoon's podcast. And another tripod. She finished as Reuter poked his head in, narrowly missing Annika, who made for the door. That was my name in college, Reuter smiled as Velda's skeptical gaze ran over him. Looking for Hobbs's office? His smile widened on Annika's clear amusement. Velda gestured down the hall, wafting him out as quickly as she could, the door swinging closed in his wake. We've let in God knows what? A sense of humor? Annika teased. God forbid. It was at that moment, staring back at Velda, that Annika realized if looks could kill, she'd have been dead long before this. World's gone to shit and I'm trying to bring reform using a team with questionable people and dubious motives at best. That's community for you, the rough with the smooth. Glossy green eyes locked with her twin. Look, you're not alone. Least, you don't have to be. People don't expect you to be perfect, Velda. Annika clipped on her sister's mic and straightened out her collar. Just be there for them. Chapter 33. Erica wiped blood and Dior rouge from her lip, where Dawn's handprint darkened the usual cool tones of her complexion. Hazel eyes narrowed as she noticed his attention flick over her shoulder, past the ornate wood paneling and leather-bound books to where Petrov, the family conciliere, stood waiting. Though quiet, he'd opened not one but both double doors, waiting somewhat impatiently for her to leave. It was unlike her to speak out of turn. She'd thought they were alone, knew Ivan was in over his head as only a mother could. She knew enough to realize Don had acted before she said something that could not be undone, but it didn't change the fact. He was to blame. They were all to blame. They had led them here. Straightening up, she made no move to hide her displeasure as she spun on her heel, stilettos echoing over the cold marble floor as she left. She hated them, all of them, and their bloody games, the stranglehold it placed on them. She couldn't breathe. Most of Moscow lay in ruins, her family falling like the great city itself. Inside her room, she locked the door before crumpling to the floor beside the Viennese sofa. Tears carving down her cheeks, washing the very foundation from her. Her heart threatening to stop altogether, where she screamed into the ether, every fiber of her begging, bargaining on behalf of her son, Ivan. Don gestured Petrov in. He didn't need to ask the reason for his visit. The family were unhappy, and their consigliere held incredible influence between all 12 clans, even after Dmitri had cost them the keys to England. Petrov was Don's nephew and known for being incredibly ruthless, carrying out the broader consensus and commanding respect across all fractions of the syndicate, despite being just 32 years of age. He was both articulate and direct, with quick-spoken English and flawless attention to detail. He stood taller than most and could usually be found in Armani suits, which downplayed his demonstrative side and made him look just like his late father. Thick raven hair and aquiline nose giving him a regal appearance, but the primal sheen in his steely grays corrected any misconception of a gentlemanly nature. Don poured a whiskey and retreat behind his ornate wooden desk. Well, they have it. Even with Don's back to him, Petrov could see the old man's broad shoulders wilt under the mounting pressure he faced. Petrov knew he had to remain impartial, but couldn't deny it pained him to see the last reminder of his father falter. The two of them had hardly seen eye to eye, but for all his late father's faults, of which there were many, He remained the pillar of what strength looked like. Don was much like his late father, though poor health and the reckless actions of his eldest son threatened to turn the tide on his legacy. Striding over to the old man, Petrov pulled out the heart meds he knew were hidden in the second drawer and dropped one out. "Take it." Petrov gestured to the tablet before returning to where he'd stood by the window, hands sliding into his pockets as he stared out over their war-torn city. Ivan had been using the ledger to try and outmaneuver the others, the family. They know you were unaware, a fact which no doubt only worsens their confidence. Petrov gave a curt nod, his gaze still fixed out of the window. Things were looking bleak for his uncle, but at least they were not calling for his head yet. "I bought you both time." Don's glossy eyes flicked up, desperate to know more. "It's not much. Won't take Velda King and her team long to break the code. Realize what they are holding." Don gave a nod. "She was with Special Branch. We know their playbook. But she doesn't have the manpower to outmaneuver us. She does now, especially if we're fighting amongst ourselves. Her rebels have joined the mercenaries, aligned their forces. Her hackers, strategists, propaganda machine. Their favor with the people, alongside the SMC's military proficiency. When they figure out what they have, we will lose. You realize what this means?" Petrov eyed him. Don gave a reluctant nod. "Ivan." Petrov stood in silence looking out of the window. "I don't know what to tell Erica. If it comes to that, make it good." Don gave a nod, black eyes dead where they fixed on the desk. "Find the ledger, whatever it takes." Petrov took his leave. There was nothing more he could do here. Once he had the ledger, he'd be in a better position to negotiate on their behalf. Asterisk. Annika stared out the window, the sound of the ongoing meeting fading to her thoughts as she remembered how it had been, how quickly they slid into blind insanity. It felt surreal. She watched pictures of past empire collapse like a tower, that same structure rising back up again to new heights, demolishing themselves more quickly each time. It was a sobering thought. Inside Inter's newly refurbished office, things had all but returned to normal. But out there, it felt as though she could see its future, which seemed to have already arrived. Below lay skeletons of burnt-out cars that lay scattered amongst the streets, and the broken arm of Westminster Bridge hung down into water. What were once the Houses of Parliament now stood as a gravestone to what had once been. On the east side of the city, two men in leather jackets and slick-back hair strode into one of the old apartment blocks that was still standing. The Volkov had a quiet but friendly relationship with those working at Madame de la Reve, offering protection and endorsement for those in the tower, in exchange for a cut of the profits and information. Marching through the lower floor casino, past the bar and an array of pole dancers, they took the lift to the upper floor's brothel and overnight quarters. Marching straight into room 854, the men spotted Kubi sprawled out on the bed, freshly inked SMC tattoo on his forearm. His scantily clothed companion quick-footed it out, throwing a wink to Petrov's boys, who eyed her bouncing curves as they passed. "All paid up, gents." Kubi smiled, head falling back on the pillow, but the men continued in, closing the door. Finding his gun missing, Kubi reached for his belt, flung it round his wrist as the first approached. "You're not my type, lads." He smiled, knocking the knife from one giant, buckle smashing into the other's head before swinging at the next. Kubi's timing was perfect. Soon both giants lay in the heap. Opening the door to the dimly lit hallway and surprised look on his companion, he strode out and retrieved his gun and shirt. Her mix of surprise and guilt seemed to him to shine of inexperience. Her dark eyes flicked between him and the gun. No lead. Kubi leaned in for what seemed round two. "Give me time." But he didn't have time, as the taser she shot out sent the young lad tumbling down the stairs, landing semi-conscious at Petrov's feet. Kubi's muffled groans could be heard from downstairs as Petrov made enquiries about the ledger. He was joined shortly after by his rough cuts who'd woken up. Kubi had given them nothing. "Boss," said the one who nursed a buckle print on his head, "I can take him back. Work on him slow." No. Petrov rummaged through the mercenaries' pockets. Men like him don't talk. Although he was well practiced at torture, unnecessary indulgence was best avoided. If his brother Dmitri was anything to go by, that's when he felt it. Turning the mercenary's wrist over, he found a tracker. I don't think we'll need him to talk. Running a trace, irritation lined his brow at the call that came through, interrupting. Yeah, bat, he cussed on answering. The Wider family had reached a decision on Ivan and his uncle.